در طول حکومت آپارتاید هر آفریقایی که علیه رژیم غیر انسانی اعتراض یا حتی صحبت می‌کرد به سرعت توسط دولت سرکوب می‌شد، تحت نظر قرار می‌گرفت و به زندان یا حتی مرگ محکوم می‌شد. یکی از اصلی ترین روش‌های مبارزه بدون خشونت خوندن اشعار اعتراضی بود. در این جنبش دو وکیل آفریقایی که به مردم با دادن راهکارهای قانونی کمک می‌کردند، نلسون ماندلا و الیور تامبو بودند. ماندلا خواستار ایجاد یک آفریقای جنوبی آزاد دموکراتیک و چند نژادی بود. دولت در واکنش این تجمعات رو ممنوع و سازمان ANC و عضویت در اون رو غیرقانونی اعلام کرد. مردم همچنان به سرپیچی از قوانین آپارتاید ادامه میدادند. با مستقر شدن جمعیت زیادی از سیاه‌پوستان در اطراف ایستگاه پلیس، نیروهای ضد شورش به آنها شروع به شلیک کردند. این تیراندازی 2 دقیقه ممتد طول کشید و تعداد زیادی زن و مرد و کودک در حالی که فرار می‌کردند از پشت مورد اصابت گلوله قرار گرفتند. اعضای ارشد ANC تصمیم گرفتند تا در مقابله با آپارتاید دست به مبارزه مسلحانه بزنند. در طول 18 ماه بعد حدود 200 حمله به مراکز دولتی صورت گرفت که به گفته ANC هیچ تلفات جانی به همراه نداشت. دولت برای یافتن نلسون ماندلا تعقیب و گریز گسترده‌ای را آغاز کرد و بعد از 17 ماه در سال 1962 موفق به دستگیری او شد. او و اعضای دیگه گروهش به جرم خیانت به کشور، توطئه و اغتشاش متهم شدند. ماندلا و همراهانش تصمیم گرفتند که اتهامات رو رد نکنند تا به واسطه بازتاب این دادگاه صداشون رو به گوش مردم جهان برسونند. ماندلا در قسمتی از دفاعیات خود اعلام کرد که برای رسیدن به هدفش که گرفتن حق مردمش بود، از مرگ واهمه‌ای نداره. در نتیجه ماندلا و همراهانش از مجازات اعدام رهایی یافتند. اما اونها به حبس ابد محکوم شدند. ماندلا در طول مدت اقامتش در این زندان به مبارزه علیه تفکیک نژادی ادامه داد. در سالهای بعد از زندانی شدن نلسون ماندلا، سرکوب سیاه‌پوستان و مقابله با جنبش‌های ضد آپارتاید از سوی دولت تشدید یافت. دولت آفریقای جنوبی از هیچ کاری برای جداسازی سیاه‌پوستان دریغ نمی‌کرد. یکی از ننگ‌ترین این اقدامات تخریب خانه‌های سیاه‌پوستان ناحیه 6 شهر و انتقال اونها به مناطق مختلف در حومه شهر بود. در فوریه سال 1966 دولت آفریقای جنوبی این ناحیه رو بر اساس قانون دسته‌بندی مناطق ناحیه سفید اعلام کرد و طی چند ماه بعد 60,000 سیاه‌پوست رو به اجبار از خونه‌هاشون بیرون روند و سر تا سر این ناحیه رو به بهانه بازسازی با خاک یکسان کرد. اینجا دیستریکت 6 یا منطقه 6 شهر کیپ تاونه. الان با دکتر اسکافر قرار دارم. یه کسی که اون موقع با خانواده‌اش جزو کسایی بوده که مجبور میشن از خونه‌شون پاشن.
It's all about human rights violations. People were taken out of respective areas simply through laws that were passed by the then nationalist government called District 6 was the largest concentration of people being kicked out and then dumped 15 to 36 kilometers outside of the city in an area which is generally called the Cape Flats. When we're talking about people, and people want to know, but how come that District 6 was declared a slum? And I can assure you that the vast majority of District 6 was beautiful, clean, well looked after.
And why did they want you guys to leave?
Because it was all areas of prime property importance.
Oh, okay.
Well, I just want to show you. Here's some pictures here you can see. This is actually my wife here celebrating her 21st birthday.
Oh my gosh, she looks like she could enter a beauty competition.
And this is my father-in-law, my two sisters-in-laws.
این آدمایی که من اینجا میبینم هیچ فرقی با طبقه متوسط رو به بالای هیچ کشور غربی ندارن. It blows my mind. Blows my mind.
I lived, if you're looking this big block here,
Yes.
that's an area called Bloemhof Flats. There you can see that's my surname there. And this over here is my wife's surname, where they lived. This is where I used to live. And suddenly we had to get out of there. That's my home is being destroyed here. Where I was born in that place.
That's where you were
28 years I was born, and that's where I live. But it's been destroyed because the developer wanted parking space for white people's cars.
32 تا خانواده رو از اینجا بلند کردن که برای خودشون مثل ماشیناشون پارکینگ بسازن.
And then you put in two areas, you can look above the doorway there.
They look like prisons.
Exactly, and you must remember now, your neighbors that you had there, it's not with you anymore. They didn't take you out as this whole community and then put you over in another area. Oh no, it's divide and rule.
Why do you think they did that?
It's to break the mold of people that can stand up and protest as a unit. So there can be no cohesion
Yes.
about wanting to get together and say, because now your big concern is, how do I survive in where I'm living? What are my children going to do? When I lived in the flats, it used to take me 20 minutes to walk to work and 20 minutes to walk back.
Yes.
Suddenly when you land up in a place like Hanover Park, so it's 3 hours of your day just wasted sitting, but add to that the cost of travel. And your salaries weren't increased to compensate for that. So you're working with the same salaries
But
at a further distance.
یعنی وقتی که روی مردم انقدر فشار مالی بود، وقتی که کارشون دورتر میشد، حقوقشون نمیرسید به رفت آمدشون، معلومه که نمیخوای و نمیتونی برای حقت بجنگی، برای اینکه فقط به فکر غذا و آب و مسکن اون روزتی. مردم منطقه 6 تنها کسانی نبودند که این جابجایی اجباری رو متحمل شدند. ساکنین 42 منطقه دیگه نیز به محله‌های دورافتاده خارج از شهر به اجبار فرستاده شدند. و این جابجایی باعث شد که شرایط زندگی طبقه متوسط سیاه‌پوستان آفریقای جنوبی حتی از قبل هم اسفناک‌تر بشه. و این فشارها منجر به آغاز جنبش جدیدی از سوی جوانان شد.
Started taking over because the parents didn't have the courage or the guts to do it. The real force came from the students, the youth, and then started saying, hang on, enough is enough. And if you look at the suffering of the people and you look at their own parents, they didn't have the willpower to do anything because all about them was a matter of survival. Now you find that the youth were tired, sick and tired of this, and being classified as second-class or even third-class citizens. After all, this is our country, the land of our birth.
با افزایش تعداد دانشجویان سیاه‌پوست در دانشگاه‌ها، سازمان‌های دانشجویی مختلفی شکل گرفت که به طور آشکار با دولت آپارتاید و برتری طلبی سفیدپوستان مقابله می‌کرد. یکی از مهمترین این احزاب ساسو نام داشت که محوریت اصلی اون مبارزات سیاسی غیر خشونت آمیز بود. اونا سعی داشتن با تاکید بر ارزش‌های مثبت در فرهنگ بومی و جنبه‌های مثبت تاریخی این کشور سیاه‌پوستان رو به این باور برسونند که سفیدپوستان برتری نسبت به اونها ندارند و از این طریق هویت از دست رفته‌شون رو به اونها بازگردونند. به این ترتیب جنبش‌های سرپیچی از قوانین تبعیض نژادی و مبارزه با دولت آپارتاید که در سالهای پس از دستگیری مندلا و ممنوع شدن ANC خوابیده بود، این بار به شکل منسجم‌تر از سر گرفته شد. در شهر دوربان، کارگران یک کارخانه آجر لاستیک سازی از حقوق کم و شرایط نامساعد کاری خود بیش از پیش خسته شده بودند. بنابراین صبح روز 9 ژانویه 1973 2000 نفر از اونها دست به اعتصاب زدند. بلافاصله بعد از اون کارگر شرکت‌های بسته‌بندی، حمل و نقل و تعمیر کشتی هم به اونها پیوستند. اونها صبح زود از خواب پا می‌شدند و در اوج شلوغی ترافیک برای حق خودشون شعار می‌دادند. پلیس اعتصاب کننده ها رو مورد ضرب و شتم قرار داد و بازداشت کرد و شرکت ها تهدید به اخراج کردند. اما علیرغم واکنش های خشونت آمیز نیروهای مسلح و پیامدهای اون، اعتصابات همچنان گسترش پیدا کردند و این از نظر اقتصادی بر آسیاب‌ها، کارخونه‌ها و صنایع تولیدی و حمل و نقل تأثیر بزرگی داشت.
The colored people and the African people are saying to their bosses, they're saying to the government, they're saying to everybody, we want a right to be able to speak for ourselves.
در نهایت شرکت‌ها ناچار شدند برای پایان دادن به این اعتصابات شرایط کاری کارگران رو بهبود ببخشند و دستمزدهای اونها رو افزایش بدن. امتیاز حاصل از این حرکت انگیزه‌ای شد برای سازماندهی جنبش‌های مدنی بیشتر در سالهای بعد. الان ما تو محله سوئتو توی شهر جوهانسبرگ هستیم و اینجا خیابون ویلاکازیه. من اومدم این محله تا در مورد یک جنبش مهم و قدرتمند یاد بگیرم. سال 76 بچه‌های مدرسه محله که یکیش اینه و چند تا مدرسه دیگه تصمیم میگیرن که یک اعتراض صلح‌آمیز داشته باشن که با خشونت تموم میشه. همونطور که داشتم میگشتم یک آقا که مال همین محل بود به اسم مارتین متوجه من شد و اومد طرفم.
Hey, hello, sister.
Hello.
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Yeah, I see there's a lot of cameras. What's with the story with the cameras?
We're actually making a documentary about the journey of South Africa overcoming the apartheid.
Okay. There's a lot of history about the streets and also the uprising that happened in the same streets in 76, you know? Let me tell you what really happened. In South Africa, during those days of apartheid, we were forced to use Afrikaans as a medium of instruction. Imagine, before you learn science, you have to learn Afrikaans.
افریکانز اون زبونیه که هلندی هایی که به این کشور اومده بودن و مستعمره خودشون در آورده بودن آفریقای جنوبی رو، زبون اونها بود. زبون اصلی مردم آفریقای جنوبی هیچ وقت افریکانز نبوده و مجبورشون میکردن که به زبون اونو اول یاد بگیرن تا اینکه بتونن شیمی و ریاضی یاد بگیرن. That's crazy.
Yeah, so the students said no, we cannot be forced to learn Afrikaans as a medium of instruction. They organized a protest throughout Soweto.
دانش آموزان پس از پایان ساعت درسی گروه به هم پیوستند تا در یک راهپیمایی مسالمت آمیز که برای خیلی از اونها جنبه تفریح داشت به سیاست آموزشی دولت آپارتاید اعتراض کنند. کم کم اهالی سوئتو نیز به دانش آموزا پیوستند و تا اواسط روز جمعیت راهپیمایان به 10,000 نفر رسید. طولی نکشید تا دانش آموزا با نیروهای پلیس روبرو شدند و بلافاصله تیراندازی نیروهای دولتی به سمت اونها آغاز شد. خیابون‌های سوئتو شاهد قتل عام 170 دانش آموزی بود که تعدادی از اونها هنوز یونیفرم‌های مدرسه بر تن داشتند. وینی همسر نلسون مندلا که خودش در این راهپیمایی حضور داشت، طی مصاحبه‌ای با شبکه PBS خاطره اون روز رو بازگو کرد.
Any mother who saw that would not wish to see that again. The bloodbath we went through, collecting our children's bodies from the streets because they dared oppose the Afrikaner.
It was supposed to be a peaceful protest, but what ended up being done was now kids were shot, and all of them were shot at the back. I could tell you one thing, that they were running, they were not fighting.
هرچند پلیس سوئتو تلاش داشت از پخش اخبار این حادثه و انعکاسش در رسانه‌ها جلوگیری کنه، اما انتشار یک عکس صدای دانش آموزای سیاه‌پوست رو به تمام دنیا رسوند. عکسی که پیکر بیجان کودک 12 ساله‌ای به اسم هکتور پیترسن رو در آغوش یک دانش آموز دیگه در کنار خواهرش نشون میده.
Through that day, there was a journalist called Sam Zimmer. Sam was standing on the other side. He had a camera with him. What he did was now starting to take the pictures. That day changed a lot of things. They used to do all these things in the dark and the world didn't know about it.
Of course.
So Sam Zimmer wanted to make sure that the world knew what was really happening here. That these people are just shooting kids.
Yeah.
They're shooting school kids. They are killing kids. They're just killing as they wish. But when the police saw him, you know what he did? He took the film, he hid it in his socks and put on a fresh film.
Oh, wow, okay.
And when the police came there, they actually took his camera, they smashed it.
Why do you think, even though the protest was peaceful, the government chose to be violent?
They chose to be violent because they were already a violent government. And even though they were hitting every day, we still wanted to do things in a peaceful way. But they decided, no, maybe the best way to disperse those kids was to start shooting because they could see that the kids were stubborn. They said, we are standing out for our rights, starting from today.
یک عکس معروف دیگه از قیام 1976 این عکسیه که پیتر مگوبانه عکاس سیاه‌پوست آفریقای جنوبی گرفت. نوجوانا ازش خواستن که ازشون عکس نگیره. او در پاسخ گفت مبارزه بدون ثبت مدارک مبارزه نیست. هدف پیتر از عکاسی این بود که به دنیا سیستم نژاد پرستانه و رفتار وحشیانه آپارتاید رو نشون بده. و همین شد که توسط نیروهای مسلح مورد اصابت گلوله قرار گرفت. بازداشت و شکنجه شد، اما با وجود تمام اینها پیتر از تلاش در راه هدفش دست نکشید. قیام سوئتو منجر به اعتراضات سراسری شد و به خاطر عکس‌ها و ثبت حوادث مورد توجه بین‌المللی قرار گرفت. دولت در واکنش به سرکوب خود شدت بخشید. مجازات‌های سنگینی رو در دستور کار قرار داد و هزاران نفر رو زندانی کرد. استیو بیکو یکی از مهمترین رهبرای آفریقای جنوبی بود که به عنوان جایگزین مندلا شناخته می‌شد.
Nowadays we have a breed of young people who couldn't be bothered, or be scared at the prospect of being shot at by police. They have something that they detest, and they detest this with pride.
رهبر دانشجویی که جنبش آگاهی سیاهان ساسو رو تأسیس کرد. در آگوست 1977 به قصد قانون شکنی بیکو از محل اقامت اجباریش خارج شد. او در راه بازگشت توسط پلیس به جرم نقض قوانین دستگیر شد. در زمان بازداشت زیر بازجویی خشونت آمیز فیزیکی پلیس از ناحیه سر آسیب دید و در 12 سپتامبر 1977 کشته شد. مراسم تدفین او با حضور 20,000 نفر از سراسر کشور به یکی از بزرگترین گردهمایی‌های تاریخ آفریقای جنوبی تبدیل شد. گزارش کالبد شکافی علت مرگ رو خونریزی مغزی و نارسایی کلی اعلام کرد و به همین دلیل در اون روز در تابوت بیکو رو باز نگه داشتند تا دنیا جراحات وارده به سر اون رو ببینه. مرگ او شدت مخالفت با دولت آپارتاید رو حتی بیشتر هم کرد. با بالا رفتن تعداد کشته ها، هر هفته مراسم تدفین تنها اجتماع عمومی غیر ممنوع و فرصتی برای پیشبرد مبارزه بود. دولت آپارتاید با مشکلات بزرگتری روبرو شد، چرا که همکنون مراکز بزرگتری از مقاومت در جامعه ایجاد شده بود. همه سعی داشتند در راه رسیدن به عدالت سهمی داشته باشند. خیلی‌ها با تحریم فروشگاه‌های سفیدپوستان دست به مبارزه مدنی زدند. به طور همزمان کارزارهای مختلفی در سراسر جهان بر علیه دولت آپارتاید شکل گرفت. در خارج از کشور مردم از خرید محصولات آفریقای جنوبی خودداری می‌کردند و تمام کمپانی‌های بزرگ خارجی دست به خروج از آفریقای جنوبی زده بودند.
One place in South Africa where it was quiet today was the stock exchange, closed until next Monday in a crisis move to try and steady a staggering economy. The government has also suspended currency transactions.
از طرف دیگه بحث تحریم‌های اقتصادی به صورت جدی به میون اومده بود و بانک‌های بزرگ جهانی هم برای بازپسگیری وام‌هاشون فشار زیادی بر دولت آفریقای جنوبی وارد می‌کردند.
New and serious problems arose for the country's reeling economy. South Africa's currency has dropped in value from 64 cents to 35 cents in a year's time.
علاوه بر این، اعتصابات کارگران در صنایع مختلف هم همچنان ادامه داشت. دهه 80 میلادی یکی از خشونت آمیزترین دوره‌ها در مبارزه با آپارتاید بود.
The latest violence in South Africa is described as the bloodiest in weeks. Turmoil in South Africa grew even worse today.
آتش اعتراض سیاه‌پوستان روز به روز شعله‌ورتر می‌شد و درگیری‌های پیاپی نیروهای دولتی و مردم کشور را در آستانه یک جنگ داخلی تمام عیار قرار می‌داد. مجموع این اتفاقات داشت کم کم دولت آپارتاید را از پا در می آورد. در چنین شرایطی دولت آفریقای جنوبی تصمیم گرفت برای کنترل اوضاع با نلسون مندلا مذاکره کنه. من با کریسپین سان فعال اجتماعی و مدیر شرکت گامی رو قرار داشتم که بفهمم دقیقاً چه شرایطی باعث شد که دولت آپارتاید از ترس وارد مذاکره بیشتر بشه.
The circumstances in the country changed considerably. I think the first thing is that there was an increasing level of internal civil disobedience. And that was organized amongst university students, civic organizations, student and youth movements, even the churches aligned around a call for change in government, So I think that grew. It just grew and it was organized. It wasn't just sporadic. There were leaders, grassroots leaders, who emerged to lead a change at civil society level. The second thing I think that happened was the call for sanctions. And that charge was led by people like Desmond Tutu. He was represented and supported by the church. And that increased tremendously the pressure on the South African government. They couldn't get access to the capital markets to borrow to fund the economy. They struggled with getting oil into the country because they had bust sanctions to get access to oil. Major financial institutions started calling the country's debt. So those factors, combined with the fact that the churches, particularly the Dutch Reformed Church, who supported the South African apartheid government, were beginning to ask moral questions. Can they morally continue to support this? Universities, scholars, people from their own church started turning against them and said, this is heresy. This makes no sense. So the moral base fell apart. And then the economic base started crumbling. And then they couldn't hold civil society together. And then look, the other thing is, white South Africans were quite affluent and they started traveling. Mm-hmm. And when they went overseas, they realized if you're white South African, some people wouldn't serve you. You couldn't change your currency.
می‌دونی چقدر جالبه؟ فقط این نبود که از نظر اقتصادی آفریقای جنوبی رو تحریم کرده بودن. مردم عادی هم تو رفتارشون نشون میدادن که مخالف عملکردشون هستن تو کشورهای دیگه و تو جاهای دیگه. What would you say was the role that ordinary people played in the struggle? Not organizations that were affiliated to the ANC, but actually everyday people.
A starting point for that would be in labor movements. Most people, particularly in this city, many people worked in factories. And their salaries and working conditions was capped by virtue of their racial classification. So ordinary South Africans started realizing the future for their children is very limited. Their life is also limited relative to their potential, purely based on their skin color. And as a consequence, they started organizing themselves on factory floors, in churches, in community centers, and started asking questions about the system. Grassroots people who struggled to put their kids through school, put food on the table, people who were thinking about the future of their children, were starting to ask real, deep, meaningful questions. And they weren't radical. They weren't revolutionary in the traditional way we understand revolutions to be. The ordinary people struggling day to day, yes, who just got tired.
Yes.
And they started getting together and organizing themselves. Many families were not supportive of revolutionary struggle and armed struggle for fear of their children, what the consequences would be for their kids. But when their kids started being imprisoned for simply being part of a peaceful protest, the parents started saying, no, enough, we need to take a position. Young people are fighting for a better future for themselves and their children one day. And so there was a more sympathetic environment, and that, no state, show me the state that can repress that. No state can repress that when that starts happening in the household.
سفیدپوستای آفریقای جنوبی از اوضاع وخیم کشور و نوع رفتار دولت با سیاهان بیخبر بودند. روزنامه‌های ارگان سفیدپوستان و تلویزیون دولتی درگیری شهرک‌ها را گزارش نمی‌کرد. و به همین دلیل سیاه‌پوستان مبارزه رو به خیابون‌ها و محله‌های سفیدها کشیدند. در 31 ژانویه 1985 رئیس جمهور بوده به مندلا وعده آزادی داد، به این شرط که از مردمش بخواد که دست از مبارزه بکشند. در جواب نامه‌ای نوشت که دخترش زینزی از طرف او در یک گردهمایی عمومی بازخوانی کرد.
I cherish my own freedom daily, but I care even more for your freedom. Your freedom and mine cannot be separated.
مندلا این پیشنهاد رو قبول نکرد، چرا که نمیتونست آزادی رو بپذیره وقتی که کنگره ملی آفریقا سازمانی غیرقانونی به حساب میاد و نمیتونه در تصمیم گیری کشور شرکت کنه. با به ثمر نرسیدن مذاکرات، مندلا همچنان در زندان به سر می‌برد.
Black activist Winnie Mandela appeared in court today and was released to the cheers of supporters.
و وینی همسرش در تمام سالهایی که او در زندان بود، یکی از مهره‌های اصلی مقاومت بود. او خودش بارها به زندان انداخته شد و سالها در حبس خانگی به سر برد. ولی با این حال دست از مبارزه نکشید.
We are here today to tell you that that day is not far when we shall lead you to freedom.
جهان در اوج حمایت و پشتیبانی از مردم آفریقای جنوبی. تونی هالینگزورث، یکی از بزرگترین برنامه‌گذارای کنسرت، در ژوئن 1988 تولد 70 سالگی مندلا رو فرصتی می‌بینه برای اعلام هرچه بیشتر همبستگی جهانی با سیاه‌پوستان آفریقای جنوبی با برگزاری یک کنسرت. 75,000 نفر برای تماشای این کنسرت یک روزه در استادیوم ومبلی لندن جمع شدند. با حضور هنرپیشه‌های سرشناس، کمدین‌ها و اجرای هنرمندایی مثل ویتنی هیوستن، استیوی واندر، استینگ و بسیاری دیگه. مردم با حضورشون عملاً خواستار سرنگونی دولت آپارتاید شدند. با 600 میلیون مخاطب، این مراسم در 67 کشور به طور زنده پخش شد. این کنسرت به یکی از بزرگترین و دیدنی‌ترین رویدادهای موسیقی پاپ تاریخ و تاثیرگذارترین رویداد سیاسی تبدیل شد. چرا که هم جنبش ضد آپارتاید و هم کنگره ملی آفریقا برگزاری این کنسرت رو مهمترین دلیل افزایش آگاهی مردم جهان از حبس مندلا می‌دونستند و بر این باور بودند که این رویداد باعث تسریع نابودی آپارتاید در آفریقای جنوبی شد. دولت آپارتاید که از همه نظر منزوی شده بود، بالاخره پذیرفت که تنها راه بقای کشور فروپاشی نظامه.
During the meeting, Mr. Mandela was informed of the government's decision regarding his release. We would all like Mr. Mandela's release to take place in a dignified and orderly manner.
و نتیجه سالها مذاکره پی در پی مندلا از داخل زندان این شد که تحت ریاست جمهوری F.W. de Klerk ممنوعیت ANC لغو شد. و در 11 فوریه 1990 دستور آزادی نلسون مندلا رو بعد از 27 سال زندانی سیاسی بودن صادر کرد.
After 27 years, Nelson Mandela walked out of Victor Verster prison today like a chief of state, flanked by his first lady and by the men who'd been hired to protect him. There they were, the South African State Police, providing security for the man who'd once been the most wanted man in Africa.
و بلافاصله بعد از ترک زندان او برای اولین بار رو در رو با ملت خودش در همینجا ساختمون شهرداری صحبت کرد.
And fellow South Africans, I greet you all in the name of peace, democracy and freedom for all. I stand here before you, not as a prophet, but as a humble servant of you, the people.
So I stood right there with a group of my comrades and friends. We didn't know what he looked like. because his picture was banned. So nobody knew what he looked like until he appeared on the balcony.
یعنی 27 سالی که نلسون مندلا داخل زندان بود هیچ. So there was no photo of him for 27 years.
It was banned. The photos were taken, but only by the South African government, the apartheid government. And so when he came out, there was this sense of awe. And nobody really knew what he was going to say. And then he spoke about reconciliation, about building a future for everybody, about a non-racial democracy, about the fact that we can never allow a form of apartheid ever to exist again, even if it's perpetrated against white people. This was the first day of nation building that started on these steps in 1990.
بعد از آزادی مندلا با هدف ایجاد کشوری جدید یک انجمن مذاکره تشکیل شد که همه احزاب سیاسی از جمله ANC رو شامل می‌شد.
Today will mark the commencement of the transition from apartheid to democracy.
بعد از 27 سال زندانی بودن، مندلا به شخص اصلی در مذاکرات برای ایجاد آفریقای جنوبی جدید تبدیل شد که در نهایت منجر به کاندید شدن او برای ریاست جمهوری از طرف ANC شد. و در سال 1994 سیاه‌پوستان آفریقای جنوبی بالاخره تونستند برای اولین بار به پای صندوق‌های رای برند.
This day is a very big day for us.
We are going to have everything that we were deprived of.
در مجموع 19.5 میلیون نفر از مردم آفریقای جنوبی در اولین انتخابات دموکراتیک شرکت کردند و رای دادند. و نلسون مندلا اولین رئیس جمهور سیاه پوست آفریقای جنوبی شد. و ارتشی که زمانی از آپارتاید دفاع می کرد با نمایش پرچم جدید کشور به او ادای احترام کرد. کسی که من الان قراره ببینم زلزال خانسی، منشی خصوصی سابق نلسون مندلا است که در سال 1994 به کابینه او ملحق شد و 19 سال به او خدمت کرد. ولی قبلش در زمان انتخابات رأیش رو به مندلا نداده بود.
I went to the polls, which I did. It was the second time I got the opportunity to vote, and I voted for the opposition. I never imagined that the ANC would win a majority. I wasn't so politically aware at that point, you know, where the country was moving and so on. But as they saw people going to the polls that morning to go and vote, black people now specifically, there was this excitement, you know, there was this pride that people get to draw a cross next to their names. And when they walked out of those voting stations, they were proud. The symbolism also of that victory is what brought the majority to change the country and have people buying into the future of our country.
Can you tell me a little bit about when you started working with Nelson Mandela and how it was the first time you met him?
When I joined Mr. Mandela's office, I was not aware of really the context of the struggle in South Africa, the liberation movement. What we heard on every level of society was to propagate in favor of apartheid. It is that brainwashing that anything and everything that looks and feels and pray different than you is a danger to you. So I was very naive when I started working with Mr. Mandela, still with that very conservative mindset as well. And in my mind, he had to be an angry, resentful, kind of terrorist figure. And it was only after our first meeting that I found completely the opposite character of what the media told me. The media was censored, you know, the TV was censored, news was censored, print media, everything was censored to us. We only got a fraction of the message. We didn't get the news from overseas that there were international protests happening to try and bring down the apartheid government. We didn't know about the international anti-apartheid movement because it wasn't broadcast. In actual fact, it was the international pressure and then the liberation movement, the people inside the country, that brought the apartheid regime to its knees. And the principle was always that even if we lose one life is too many. And I think that is what Mr. Mandela really stood for. If he wanted to achieve these goals and he wanted to bring about this democracy, the democracy that is based on basic human rights, you cannot afford to sacrifice one life. And so he tried different ways of achieving that. Even if you look at his history in prison, the conditions he was very unhappy with, or they were the prisoners. Mr. Mandela then started writing letters to the prison authorities, and he was relentless. It may seem to us that it was just a complaint, but there is a much, much bigger strategy behind that. You exhaust the government by pointing out every single, no matter how minute the detail might be, you point out every single issue that you can. The apartheid regime wanted to send these prisoners to Robben Island to die. They hoped that the world would forget about them and die. But the fact that every other day you receive a letter from Nelson Mandela, it becomes very difficult to ignore them or to forget about them. So it was a very strategic move as well. And all of this, through the 20, 30 years that he was in prison, all of this ended up to have them all sit around the negotiation table.
Once he did become president and he was in power, how did he structure his first cabinet?
He always wanted to make sure, and he believed that representation is extremely important. He wanted the people on the opposite side of the divide, so the people who were known to be staunch conservatives, to be included in those negotiations, because if they are not every voice in this country is represented.
How did the new government of Nelson Mandela ensure that by giving voices to members of the previous regime, he's not allowing them to seep back in again?
The new regime now had the majority. Mm-hmm. So in big decision-making processes, so in a cabinet meeting or in parliament, you now have the liberation movement as the majority represented. So you could outvote, that seeping back in of those forces. And you had to get the old regime's buy-in into moving forward so that you can also learn from them and use their skill. Otherwise, overnight, the country could collapse. And Mr. Mandela had this compassion to even allow people who basically took his life away, to allow them to have a voice and to give them the opportunity that if they are ready to change, that they would change, and then they believe them when they change and put trust in people. That kind of compassion is something that we rarely see around the world.
I now declare that the hearing of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is now in session.
مندلا می‌خواست که این وحدت ملی در آفریقا پایدار باشه و برای همین کمیسیون حقیقتیابی و آشتی رو با دزموند توتو تشکیل داد. کمیسیونی که هدفش تحقیق درباره قتل‌ها و دیگر موارد نقض حقوق بشر در رژیم آپارتاید بود.
What kind of man, listening to those moans and cries and groans, what kind of man is that?
Our objective is to find out the truth in order to assist in the process of healing our land, to promote reconciliation, and to ensure that the awful things we hear about will not happen again.
کسانی که مرتکب جنایات و جرایم وحشیانه شدند با شرکت در این دادگاه‌ها مورد قضاوت قرار می‌گرفتند.
Why do you think it was important for people of color who had suffered under the apartheid? Why do you think it was important for them as individuals to have this platform to speak to their oppressors?
Well, it's part of mental health, really. You have to talk about your pain. They lost loved ones without ever getting closure. Where was this person killed? How was this person killed? Why was this person killed? It was also important for us on the other side to understand what you inflicted, not necessarily directly and physically, but by supporting a system that caused this amount of pain and sadness with people. We know that if you keep silent in a situation like that where there's injustice, you automatically side with the oppressor. And then you don't have to necessarily have been an active racist doing something that degraded someone. Just supporting the system made you by default part of that system. And for us to move forward, we have to get to a point where people all say, this is how I am responsible. And I do want to believe that Mr. Mandela had a great role to play in that because of who he was. He wanted to move the country forward, and he wanted to show people that let's all go through this process of putting our sins on the table, so to speak. Let's be open about this, because from that point we are on equal foot and we can heal as a nation. Nelson Mandela showed us if he could do it after the hardship of being removed, after the hardship of prison, if he could do it, if he could forgive and work with people from the opposite side, if he could work with me, then it's within anyone's ability to leave your past behind, to give people a new opportunity to build and to allow people redemption.
What kept the fire to fight alive? Why do you think they didn't give up after so many centuries of oppression and so many years of being under the apartheid law? Why do you think they never gave up?
Because people really knew that this was an unjust, unlawful system. It was, as we know today from the United Nations, it was a crime against humanity. And that kept people fighting because they knew they had a valid reason. And you have to fight for that. Don't leave it to other people. You have to get involved. Be an active citizen, because if not, history repeats itself. One of the things that Mr. Mandela said is that through introspection, we have to ask ourselves, why did it take us 48 years to turn around a system as inhumane and unlawful and unjustifiable as the apartheid regime? Why did it take people of conscience this long to bring about change?
واقعا تصور این که چنین سیستم وحشیانه و غیر انسانی تونسته بود برای مدتی به این طولانی ادامه داشته باشه سخته. یکی از سخنان به یاد موندنی مندلا اینه که همیشه به نظر غیر ممکن میاد تا وقتی که انجام بشه. و مبارزه موفق مردم آفریقای جنوبی برای آزادی و دموکراسی یکی از الهام بخش ترین نمونه های این سخن مندلا برای همه نسل هاست.
مدت کوتاهی که من اینجا تو آفریقای جنوبی بودم یاد گرفتم که اتحاد با استراتژی داشتن به چه معناست، که روحیه شکست ناپذیر داشتن به چه اندازه مهمه، که رهبرای صلحجو چقدر ارزشمندن و هرقدر یک رژیمی قدرتمند و عظیم باشه برای بقای خودش شانسی نداره وقتی که یه ملت تصمیم بگیره که آینده و سرنوشتشو خودش رقم بزنه.